When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for the annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther, and explained it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they would be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back his answer. "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to the royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. This is the word of God.
Or would anybody like to guess? Some of you will know the answer to this, I think. Does anybody know, or would anybody like to guess, how many times God is mentioned in the book of Esther? Some of you, I can tell by your faces, know the answer. Okay. Anybody? Zilch. 0. Okay, that's interesting, isn't it? God is not mentioned in the book of Esther, which is a little odd, because surely the Bible is about God, and you would expect all the books to mention God, but there are 2 books that don't, and Esther is one of them. However, you can see, as the way the story pans out, you can really see God's activity within this story. So in a way, it's kind of nice that God isn't mentioned, because it allows us, as we read it, to see how God is working through the story. Now, has anybody had in their lives coincidences which, other people might call them coincidences, but really, God had his hand on the situation. Has anybody experienced that? Raise your hands if you have. Okay, all right. Some people call them God incidences. So instead of coincidences, we call them God incidences. I've had a number in my life, and maybe some of you have as well. And there's a number of coincidences, God incidences in this story that we can see. So it starts with a king, Xerxes, which is a great name. Imagine having a dog called Xerxes and walking him in the park and shouting, Xerxes! Okay, fantastic name. Not really a fantastic character in the Old Testament. He's an interesting character. He drinks a lot, and maybe because he drinks a lot, he likes a party, he likes a banquet. He seems to be easily led in the sense that he can be persuaded to change his mind. Okay? And maybe it's because he's been drinking that he can be persuaded to change his mind, but he's definitely can be influenced, shall we say. He sometimes gets angry. Again, the drink probably didn't help with that, because sometimes when people are drunk, they're quicker to get angry. Okay? And we see this a lot with this king. But he's very powerful. He rules over 127 provinces from India to Kush, we're told in verse 1. So 127 provinces, that's millions of people. This is a very powerful, influential man. He's dangerous, really. He's a dangerous man, okay? And that's Xerxes. And he's had a period of 180 days where he's been demonstrating his wealth to the world. Okay? So not just a one-off event, a whole series of events, a season where he invites everyone in his province and beyond to come and sort of view the wealth and splendour that he has, that he's amassed. At the end of this time, he has, you guessed it, a banquet. Because Xerxes loves a banquet. Okay, and this banquet goes on for 7 days. Has anybody been to a 7-day banquet? Okay, I never have. Okay, but this is a 7-day banquet. And at the end of it, he is drunk. Okay. And in his drunkenness, I don't know, it's a little bit odd, this. But he wants to call his wife in so that everybody can gaze at her beauty and splendour. So it's a bit odd. Maybe he's spent 180 days showing everybody his wealth, and this has been what he's been doing for 180 days, so now he wants to show those assembled the beauty of his wife. She is called Queen Vashti, and he calls her in. And do you know what she said? She said, no, I ain't coming. Okay? So, there are various people speculate why that might have been. Some speculate that she may have been pregnant at the time, heavily pregnant, not feeling like, very well, and no, I'm not doing that. Okay? She knows that the king is a dangerous man. She knows that this is a big decision. Others speculate that he's drunk, and there were lots of other powerful men who were drunk, and the queen does not want to put herself in the situation where she has to go before lots of drunk, powerful men, and I can quite understand that. But whatever the reasons are, she says no. And so he's furious. He's angry. You'll see this a lot in the book of Esther. He gets angry about this. And he's like, he's humiliated. What am I going to do? What am I going to do about this? And he calls his advisors, and they say, well, she's got to be gone. She can't be queen anymore. You've got to demote her from being a queen, and she can never be in your presence again. And by the way, if she gets away with this, then there'll be women all over the kingdom who'll be saying no to their husbands. Okay, and we can't have that. All right? Okay, so a decree is kind of sent out that Vashti is no longer to be in his presence. She's no longer to be queen. And by the way, the man is the leader of the household. Okay, and this kind of strange edict goes out, and then that's the end of chapter 1. Okay, chapter 2, a few years go by. Now we understand from our historical records that he wasn't just partying all the time. We understand from other historical sources that Xerxes was at war with Greece during this time, and that was going on. But whatever happens 4 years later, Esther comes along. Okay, so there's been a kingdom-wide beauty contest. Women from 127 provinces are viewed and invited. It's interesting to speculate what that invitation may have looked like. Invited or maybe taken, okay? And they are brought to the king, and so he selects his new queen from this large amount of beautiful women who've been brought in to his, and I never know how to say this word, harem, how do I say it? Harem, okay. So they've all been brought in, and then he's going to select a wife. And during this time, a young lady called Esther is taken. The word taken is used in this translation. She's an orphan. She has no, her parents have died. She's been raised by her cousin, a man called Mordecai. Okay, and they're local. They're in the citadel of Susa. There is a Jewish community living in that citadel, and so she's a local girl in that sense, and she gets taken into the harem. Okay, and for whatever reason, everybody likes her. Okay, the managers of the harem like her, and everything she says and does, she becomes favoured. She becomes favoured in the harem. And then eventually, this is now 4 years after the previous queen has been banished, she goes before the king. And guess what? She's his favourite as well. He just likes her. He likes her more than any of the other women in the harem. And so she becomes queen. She's a Jew. She hasn't told anybody this because her cousin, who's brought her up, Mordecai, has said, don't tell anybody that you're a Jew. Okay? Out of hundreds of thousands of eligible women, of the hundreds that were bought, this local Jewish orphan girl is the one who becomes queen. Okay? Do you think God might be working? I do. Now Mordecai, how is he feeling at this point? He's raised her. She's been taken into the harem. How's he feeling? We don't know exactly. We can speculate. I think he'd be concerned. And he wanders up to the harem regularly. He's not allowed in, but he mills around at the area, and he mills around at the king's gate. And it just so happens that there's a plot against King Xerxes. And it just so happens that Mordecai overhears it. Okay? He sends word to Esther. There's a plot against the king. Esther sends word to the king. It's investigated. It's found to be a real plot. And Mordecai is honoured. His name is written down in the royal books. Okay? Is that a coincidence? Or is God at work here? What do you think? Okay? Because that's pretty much the end of chapter 2. Chapter 3, there's a man called Haman. He was an Agagite. Now that matters because Agag, his army was kind of destroyed by King Saul, who was a Benjaminite. And so now Haman, who is Xerxes' right-hand man, are you following? Yeah. Okay, so the King Xerxes has a right-hand man called Haman, and he gives him a lot of power, and he is an Agagite, if I've said that correctly. And Agag was sort of destroyed by Saul and Samuel, Saul from the tribe of Benjamin, and Mordecai is from the tribe of Benjamin. So this is not good. Okay, there's history here, and both men know it. Okay, so this is not good. All right, and then Haman wants everybody to bow before him. Because I've been talking for so long, would everybody just like to bow? Come on, let's see you all bow. Stretch your backs. There we go, because we've still got a few minutes to go. All right? Haman wants everybody to bow before him, and Mordecai didn't. Okay? He didn't bow. And when everybody said, why are you not bowing? You've got to bow. He wouldn't do it. And word got back to Haman. And Haman didn't just want Mordecai destroyed. He wanted all the Jews destroyed. Okay? So maybe, again, he knows the history. He knows what happens to Agag. He's an Agagite, so maybe that hate is there. And have you noticed we've seen this in the UK, just in the last month or so? The hate is there, and sometimes something happens, and it stirs it up, and it shows itself. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah? Okay, we've seen this recently. So the hate in Haman is stirred up, and he wants to destroy the Jewish people. He wants to destroy them. Okay, and he sets a date that they're going to be destroyed. Now, imagine that. Imagine that a date has been set for your destruction. Your neighbours know about the date. They're not going to be destroyed, but you are, and the date has been set for your destruction. How does that feel? Does that stir up hate? I imagine it does. Okay? There might be plenty of haters around who are like, why should we wait till that date? Let's throw things at them now. Okay, let's make their life a misery now. Okay? So there's a lot of hate being stirred up against the Jewish people now. They're living with that day by day. And they've been given a date where they're going to be destroyed. How does that feel? Do you think? Okay. And this is one of those sermons where the introduction is longer than the sermon. Okay? Because that was just the introduction. That brings us to our chapter today, which is chapter 4. Mordecai hears about this. And the first thing we see is he tears his clothes, he puts on sackcloth and ashes, he wails loudly and bitterly, and so do all the people. They all do the same thing. They feel it, and they're honest in their emotion about it. They're shocked, they're disgusted, they're fearful, they're grieving, they're wailing, they're upset, and rightly so, as they should be. We're also told they fast, and you can be sure with that fasting came a lot of praying. Okay, so they turn to God in their hour of need. They turn to God in their hour of need. So Esther hears about Mordecai. He's torn his clothes, he's got his sackcloth and ashes. What's going on? She thinks to herself. Word won't have got to the harem about this. So she sends someone to speak to him because he's there every day. What's going on? And he sends word back. Let's see. So Hathach, she summoned him. He went out to Mordecai And Mordecai told him everything that had happened, including the amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He gave him a copy of the text of the edict for the annihilation of the Jews, which had been published in Susa, to show it to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence, to beg for mercy, and to plead with him for her people. Okay, now this is Mordecai, who has raised Esther, who loves Esther, and has this big ask for her. Okay, this is why it's a big ask, because Esther doesn't say yes straight away. She just before I say yes, can I just make this point? And this is what she says. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. She instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has one law, that they are to be put to death unless he extends the gold scepter. And she hasn't been summoned for a while, okay? So he's asking her, the odds are that Mordecai is asking her to go to her death. There's a good chance, okay? So that's what he's asking her to do. Mordecai is he loves her, but we're all going to die anyway, okay? Or is that what he's saying? Let's see. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. Okay? You might die anyway. Okay? If you remain silent at this time, now this is interesting, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. Okay? So there is faith there, isn't there? There's faith that God will bring relief somehow or some way to the people. But who knows? Maybe you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Okay? For such a time as this. You know, maybe you are here for such a time as this. Maybe you're in the situations that you are in for such a time as this. We know that in the end, God is working his purposes of salvation out through Jesus Christ. We know that every knee will bow. We know that. But we're here for such a time as this. And God might have things for us to do for such a time as this. Us. We. Me. You. God might be calling us to do certain things for such a time as this. The Methodist Covenant service says Christ has many services to be done. And some of those can't be done by anyone except you. You know? Can't be done by anyone except you. All right. So, who knows? Maybe, Esther, you are here for such a time as this. And that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because it was amazing that she became the new queen in the manner that she did. All right. So Esther sends this reply, and this is really what today's sermon is about. Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days. My people will do the same. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. I like this because it's backup, isn't it? Sometimes we do that. We had the privilege to give Yogesh a little bit of backup. Okay, the other week, didn't we? A number of us gathered to pray. While Yogesh was in court, a number of us gathered to pray for him. Okay, backup. This is one of the things we do in the community of faith. We back each other up through prayer. It became clear that Esther was going to do this. If I perish, I perish, she says. Okay? I am going to do this even if it costs me my life. Okay? But she had backup. The community fasted. The community prayed. The community begged and sought the Lord, asking for his favour for Esther. And in that context, she goes and does what needs to be done. Mordecai went away, carried out all Esther's instructions, got them all to fast and pray. And she went forward saying, if I perish, I perish. How does the rest of the story go? Well, you can read it when you get home. That's your homework this week. What is God calling you to do now? There probably will be a sacrifice involved. Hopefully, it's not a sacrifice of your whole life, as this could well have been for Esther. You can read the rest of the story and find out what happened. Okay, it might involve a sacrifice. But in the end, we can always trust in him to be with us. Eric Liddell often gets mentioned around about the time of the Olympics. He went to he died in prison, in like a prisoner of war camp. But while he was there, he got the chance to interact with some of the other people there, and a lady called Mary Taylor Previtt. She was a child in the same prisoner of war camp that he was in. And he taught her this hymn when she was a child, when they were both there in this prisoner camp. Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change, he faithful will remain. Be still, my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend, through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. And that's what, in the end, the Christian always knows. We always knows, even when the way is thorny, we know a joyful end lies ahead. We had the privilege of doing the funeral for Alma this week. We know for her there was a joyous end, and we can all know in that. So when we have these challenges, we can be brave in serving the Lord, knowing that in the end he's with us and he takes us to a joyful end.